My friend, you are grappling. This is a book of grappling.
It is.
It's reparations, the purpose of art, the purpose of writing, your role, your responsibility, the Israel, Palestine. I can see you want to go back to just writing comic books again for 5 years. This is what was in you that you thought, I need to take on these big questions, including, what is this for? What is writing for?
I have, for a long time, had in the back of my head that we do not have a complete understanding of politics. That is to say, we think of politics as what happens inside of a voting booth. You go in and you choose, pull a lever for whatever.
Right.
But there's a whole entire architecture that happens outside of that voting booth that defines what goes on inside of it, what issues are appropriate, frankly, who is human and who is not. And that is the work of stories, movies, television shows, writing, all of that. And being a writer, and this coming out of me talking to my students at Howard University at the time, I really, really wanted to address that. So often I get the question, why should I write?
Your students will say that?
I write? No, in general, but by the time they get to me, my students are there. But a lot of, other times when I'm, out in the world, what is writing gonna do? Like, what is it actually gonna change? And what I wanted people to understand is writing actually shapes the world around you entirely.
Right.
Yeah.
See, I would have said basic cable, but okay, writing.
But somebody has to write the scripts, right?
That's exactly right.
Exactly.
Do you grapple with that as a burden or a call to arms? What is, for you, how do you wear it?
Oh, it's exciting.
It's exciting.
Yeah, it gets me up in the morning.
Right.
It pumps my blood. I can't wait. You know what I mean? There are people who, I got a friend who's an ER doc, right? And I was texting this morning about, everything that was going on.
Right.
And he disappeared for a second. He said, sorry, this guy just got shot. I'm sorry. And I said to him, how beautiful is it to have work that actually matters? You're out there saving people's lives. And I'm not an ER doctor, but it is a blessing to feel like what I write actually matters in the world.
Right.
You know what I mean? It gives me meaning and purpose. And I kind of wanted to convey that, to all the young writers, who hopefully...
As inspiration.
Yes, it's a beautiful
Your friend
thing.
was at work when the guy got shot, right?
He was, yes, he was. Yeah, he was.
Because for a second I was like, wait, he was at work, right?
Yeah, he was at work.
It wasn't like you were talking to me, he was like...
No, he was at work. Yeah.
All right, that's very good. Yeah. Do you get frustrated, and this is something that I think about sometimes, that the world that you would prefer to see, that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice and the work of writing is trying to help facilitate that it is that arc of moral justice is so resilient against bending, that it's so hard to matter in that form?
I get sad.
Right.
And there are a lot of moments in here where I was really sad.
Right.
But at the same time, like I said, it fills me with purpose. I don't know if I would have that purpose I talked about just a few minutes ago, without that great difficulty. Honestly, it feels great to know that if I actually try really, really hard at the thing, if I actually work really, really hard to write the best book I possibly can, that I could be here talking to you. That it actually
you could have written a shitty book and been on air. Listen, if that's the case, I can tell you that you didn't have to work nearly this hard. But it's a beautifully felt book. I want to ask you, there's a certain aspect of your career that has really tried to reconcile, not with things in the present, but their vestiges, the structures, racial politics, slavery, economic injustices, where it might not be the active virus, but it's these vestiges of it that still, leach into the groundwater and make it toxic and pollute it. This book felt a little different in that you were also going into the present and bringing those lessons with you. And I thought that was a really moving part of the book.
Yeah, that's true, and I guess I'm going to be the one to broach this, but it was obviously most active when I was in Jerusalem, when I was in Haifa, when I was on the West Bank.
Right.
I mean, it was the history, but the history was active.
Right.
And that was tough. That was tough. I'm used to, going to some, slave plantation and saying, well, yeah, this did happen 150 years ago, but here's how, you can still feel the impact. And you go, no, it's right now.
Right.
It's right now.
And it comes on the heels of, so in the book, you take a trip to Senegal.
I do, yes.
Is that in relation to your trip to Israel and the West Bank in that same time frame, or was that split up?
So I think I went in, this would have been like September of 2022 to Senegal, and then May of 23 to the West Bank and to Israel. And weirdly enough, they are in conversation with each other. I can't say I intended that.
Right. Well, that's why I was curious, because there is a music there between the two.
No, there is. I mean, Senegal is very much about me, frankly, investigating the very stories that gave me my name, and gave me my identity, and trying to work through that, and frankly, not completely working through it by the time I got over there. And then, I take this trip, with this wonderful organization, a Palestine Festival of Literature. And I get over there, for 5 days, and I spend another 5 days with these ex-IDF guys, who had their own political evolution. And this is very weird to say, but as much sympathy as I had for the Palestinians, watching Zionism in the world, even feeling like this is wrong, what I'm saying is wrong, I was like, my God, I know how you get here. I know how it happens. And I don't mean like I approve of it. But I mean, like, I see how it happens. I totally see how it happens.
Is how you see how it happens, because you talk about Yad Vashem and going there and being moved, is the idea, because you have a line in the book that I think is one of the most powerful, which is, and I want to make sure that I get it right, which is, your oppression will not save you.
Yeah. Ugh.
Which is, and you write about that in relation to the black experience in America, but also about the Jewish experience in the Holocaust, as well as in Israel. And what did you mean by that?
I think we would like to think that you go through, a horrific experience, be it the Middle Passage, Jim Crow here, be it the Holocaust or the centuries before that of pogroms, oppression, etc., and somehow you will be morally improved by coming out of that. You might be, but it's just as likely that you will conclude that, in fact, the world is a cold, hard place, and it's a zero-sum game, you know what I mean? And what matters is who has the guns and who doesn't.
Right.
I stand opposed to that, just on principle, period. You know what I mean? But I get how people take that lesson.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think it's discomforting for us to feel, because we feel sympathy for people. You know what I mean?
Of course.
I'm walking through Yad Vashem and I'm feeling it on a very, very deep level, only to come back here and realize I was, about a mile away from a massacre of a Palestinian village. That's hard to take.
Hey, it's,
you know what I mean?
Listen,
Like,
I'm raised in, obviously, cultural Jewish tradition, and I imagine, if you were to feel like people in the name of your people did some things that you found objectionable, it hits you different.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And it's not a complete parallel, but that's why in that chapter I wanted to talk a little bit about Liberia, for instance. You know what I mean? And just the idea. I get it, the appeal of, hey, we're gonna have a state of our own. We're gonna get away from these people that did, X, Y, and Z for us. We will have safety there. And yet then you find yourself enacting, systems that, if not are the same or similar, are at least, morally deeply problematic.
Right. And having to justify them through either threat or the situation or you don't understand.
Yeah.
And what I'm wondering is that the story in a condensed form of all of us? Does for society to progress, does there also have to be exploitation? Do you grapple with this idea that when we think about anything, whether it's the American story or the Israeli story or any of those, it's stories of empire, whether it was the Ottoman Empire or the Caliphate, it's groups of people living under the grace of a leader who controls their lives. And can we progress outside of that? Do you think about, is there another way to do this? Has there been another way to do this?
Yeah.
If we shine that light on any country that grew through, won't there be a story of exploitation and mistreatment that we find? Maybe not as horrific, but we find it.
Yeah, I think, though, we have to guard against the temptation to accept that history is necessarily the limit of who we are as human beings. That just because, I mean, that's been, that it's been that way, that it necessarily has to be that way. I will, for instance, highlight, the underlying role of nationalism and the belief that a nation state is the way to secure and safeguard a minority. That is a very recent development as a belief system, actually.
Right.
That is not eternal. That's not.
But prior to that, wouldn't it have been tribalism, or wouldn't it have been something?
It would have been a king,
collection of.
It would have been a pope. It would have been, my allegiances, X, Y, and Z. But what I'm saying is, it is not innate in us to say, I am of this ethnicity. We should all have a state together, and perhaps more importantly, we should deny rights to people who are not of that ethnicity.
Right.
We don't have to be that way. We don't have to be that way.
A man from your lips to God's ears. I always wonder, there was that, I can't remember the experiment, but it was they assigned a class where people with brown hair got privileges.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the people with blonde hair were like,
Right.
and they got sad. And then the people with brown hair started to kind of abuse the people with blonde hair. Yeah. And there's a part of me that thinks, boy, we could solve religious differences. Mm-hmm. And somehow we would go back to killing each other over something else equally as arbitrary. Yeah. And that, I'm wondering how you get that zero-sum game element that you witnessed up front out of it. Because I'd like to believe it's not malevolence, but ignorance and fear.
I think it's a lot of fear. And frankly, I think it's a lot of anger.
Right.
I think, and obviously, for obvious reasons, you would know this better than me, but I sense that a lot of it is the humiliation of the Holocaust. I think that is, very, very much present.
Right.
And not feeling like I will never be in that position again.
Sure.
Well,
never again.
Right.
I think the thing that so many Jewish people, and not everybody, look, it's not a monolith either. Mm-hmm. Jewish religion, Jewish culture is certainly not a monolith, and there's many different opinions. I think if we start from a baseline of, I would like a safe and secure Israel and a safe and secure Palestine, and that's my starting point to any argument, and then we're just talking strategy. Yeah. But I think the idea of never again, you try to internalize it not just as a self-defense kind of dictum. Right. You hope to think of that as never again for anyone.
Right, right.
And that's the part that feels the worst.
Yeah.
When you look at it in that way.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm curious how you feel, so in Africa, I'm curious about what you think about this idea of diaspora.
Yeah.
When people are in diasporas and it carries this weight of you are lost. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You are not in a place where you can, I don't think Italian people who live in America think of themselves as, I'm in a diaspora. Right. They think of themselves as like, I'll take a tour, maybe when I'm old, you know what I mean? But Jewish people, black people, there's this feeling of somehow we're not safe. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like that's a dangerous thing to think.
Does it not come from being degraded and being made to feel like you are outside of the place that maybe you would like to call home? There's this great
that's interesting.
Book, The Pity of It All, and it's about Jews in Germany.
Are you going to make me read something else?
No, it's going to be quick. I promise to be quick about this.
I'm still just getting through Breaking Bad. I can't even...
But it's all of these, Jews all these German Jews who want to be German. Right? Like they really, really want to believe in Germany.
Right.
And they get the Holocaust.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that has to assault your sense of, the idea that you can somehow be safe out of
And then how much then does humiliation play a part in all of it, including kind of what has been what we would consider the modern age version of exploitation and colonialism? Like, even when we think about the regions that you went into, were kind of a post-World War I mandate that was drawn, Lebanese, Syrian, Palestine mandate. The French are going to take this, the English are going to take that. I mean, it's pawns on a board that people are moving around. And does that humiliate a region to the point where if we don't address that, we can't get through it?
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
I mean, I will say that one of the hard things about that, and getting a little too psychological about this, is I spent 10 days there.
So you know it all.
Exactly. Right. One of the tough things was, I have to tell you, the perspective of Palestinians and the extent to which their perspective has been pushed so far out of the frame was incredible. I felt like I was seeing a new world.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's like shameful for me to admit. I'm not bragging about that. You know, it's not because that world wasn't there, or that world doesn't, hasn't been trying to present itself. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I just wonder how many of these conversations would be improved if our media organizations made a concerted effort, whenever they talk about this topic, to ask, do we have anybody Palestinian that we've invited to be part of this at all?
Allow it on the Democratic Convention floor.
I saw that.
I think access to different stories has always been a difficulty for America in general because of that sort of solipsistic worldview. You know, we tend to be slightly narcissistic when it comes to the vision of it. And it's such a necessary thing. I wonder if it really improves it. I mean, here's something that I grapple with. I've known about it forever. I have friends who have Palestinian families who've suffered through it. I have friends in Israel who suffered through it. And it sometimes feels as though the only people that benefit are the powers that be. And all these good people are so left behind by this weird power structure that we left in place there.
Yeah.
And you bring up an interesting point, which is a path forward of reconciling humiliation. And I don't know, what is the mechanism of that? Is there one? And is it that sort of, you think about South Africa and Truth and Reconciliation, but is there a mechanism to heal that for people? Or is it purely self-determination and that's...
I don't know.
Well, that's all the time we have.
I don't know.
But it is, I wonder, because you bring up such an interesting, it is such a powerful river of emotion.
Yeah.
And when you say, I can almost not cry talking about it. Because it's so deeply gets at the heart of our humanity. Like, people just want to be seen and just want to be...
No, and it's powerful. I could feel it.
Yeah.
I could really feel it. One thing I would suggest is, and we have actually had to struggle with this as African Americans, and I'll tell you this from the Black perspective. There is great, not always spoken shame in the Black community over the kind of physical traumas we've endured. You have to understand, man, every single one of us, every single African American is a child of sexual violence. All of us.
Right.
All of us. There is not a single pure African American who came through a sleep. There is an amount of humiliation in that. There is an amount of humiliation in watching, and I've written about this, films from the 60s and watching these kids and these children, get beaten by the cops. There is humiliation in, watching today, you know what I mean? George Floyd, a knee on his neck. And I do think, a significant part of it is understanding, particularly with the past, these people didn't want to be enslaved.
Right.
You know what I mean? These people didn't want to get beat. And it's not true that these people did nothing. It's not true that these people just willingly, went to it. There was a slogan out for a while that a lot of us shouted down, "We are not our ancestors," as if to say we somehow are more, resilient and resistant. You know what I mean? We're not going to be punked and chumped. Yes, we would have. If we had been them, the same thing would have happened. We're no better. We're no braver.
There's such an analog with that with the Jewish community, and there is, and you hear it a lot about, the first thing Hitler did is he disarmed the Jews, and you're like, the Jews were not like gun-toting motherfuckers. Like, it wasn't like, if you had taken our violins, maybe that would have been something. Like, oh, they disarmed the Jews, and that's how Hitler was able to get the Jews to do that. And you're like, oh, you know who had guns and didn't do too well with Hitler? France.
Right.
But you're right. There's that sense of like, how could you let your people? How could you allow that to happen? And it does skew their perspectives. And I can already see your next book Where you fix it all. It's an amazing piece. And the main thing is, and listen, man, like, let's not kid ourselves. Once you delve into Israel-Palestine, you're going to take a ton of shit. I don't know where it'll come from everywhere. And I hope you don't wear it personally, but you've done the most important thing.
Can I just say one quick thing?
Yes, please.
It will not measure up to the burdens of what I saw Palestinians on the West Bank bearing. It's not even close.
That's an excellent point. The only point I was going to make is, through your discomfort, albeit not the same discomfort, you've done the most important thing, which is try to advance and delve into an understanding of a complexity that we haven't figured out in 10,000 years. And so I applaud that. And your writing, as always, is so beautiful and moving. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
The message, Ta-Nehisi Coates.